Good morning. Good morning and welcome. So we're not going to stand on ceremony this morning. I'm the speaker for today. I'm Leonard, Manton Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Clark. And I know many of you know me and know the Clark very well already. And it's actually very much a delight to be speaking to this audience about a subject dear to all our hearts, I imagine, which is this wonderful collection that we steward, that we build on, and that we all appreciate and learn from in so many ways. And so as I get started here, I just want to make sure to thank, first of all, my Clark colleagues who were involved with these two exhibitions. It's a fantastic team, too numerous to name all at once, or all here, but very much appreciated for all their contributions. And particularly all those donors who, over the last 50 years, which we are celebrating, have enriched the collection of works on paper with gifts of art and supported the museum in so many other ways. So we're profoundly grateful to all of you. Well, it is always a privilege to bring out a large swath of the works on paper collection. They are the most numerous works in the collection, but they're also the most hidden by practical necessity. They suffer with excessive exposure to light, as you probably all know. So it's a pleasure whenever we can make this great resource a little less hidden. And looking back on 50 years of collecting is a very special opportunity, but it also involves a very high degree of selectivity, shall we say. At the opening of the Clark Art Institute in 1955, there were 500 drawings, 1,400 prints, and 0 photographs. It's not an interest of Sterling and Francine Clark. Now, the works on paper collection totals at least 6,500 works, probably more like 6,800. I don't have a, to the perfect figure, but at more than 3 times Sterling and Francine Clark's original gift. I find another interesting statistic involves the rate of acquisition. So 4,000 works on paper were added between 1973 and 2023, this 50-year span we're looking at, or an average of 80 per year, versus only 33 per year between 1955, our founding, and 1973. So we can see that the collection has been growing and thriving at an ever faster pace. Now, I should note that today's lecture is different from others I have done on this stage, introducing exhibitions that had a specific art historical focus or context or argument, and which is not to say you can certainly learn some art history in this pair of exhibitions, but I would say the main drivers for the installation have been visual, really, and aesthetic. There's no set order in which you need to view these exhibitions, or for that matter, the sections within them. There's no chronology, there's no linear path, so I encourage you to find your own way and seek out your own connections within and between the works. My advice is also to take pleasure in the visual and let the history come second. And accordingly, this lecture will be more perhaps episodic and essayistic than most I have given from this podium. With so much to choose from, the goal has been to show selections from our best material, including some surprises. Quite a few works on view, and not just the new acquisitions, are being shown for the first time at the Clark. Not that they didn't deserve to be shown earlier, but they simply didn't find their place in an exhibition project before. So that has been a great pleasure. There are 2 shows under the umbrella of 50 years and forward, both celebrating works acquired since 1973. Now, the one in the Thaw Gallery, which I hope many of you have already seen, opened November 18th. It focuses on British prints and drawings in honor of the Manton gift that gave the building its name. The Clark Center exhibition, opening today, covers the same 50-year span of acquisitions and includes prints, drawings, and photographs from other nationalities. And so the two exhibitions work together. Even though they're on view in two distinct gallery spaces, in fact, two different buildings, I've decided for this lecture, perhaps perversely, to enmesh one in the other. That is, I'm going to drop in the overview of the British show somewhere in the middle. I'm hoping this tiny bit of suspense will keep everyone alert. So, but meanwhile, I can cut to the chase and say that the message of both exhibitions is quite simple. First of all, given that everything in them was acquired after the era of Sterling and Francine Clark, they show that our collection is continually growing and evolving. It's a living, breathing entity. It's always being added to, and it's still changing in dynamic ways. Certain milestones, major gifts, for example, can certainly be charted, but the changes are also incremental. Anyone looking for patterns in the collection's development will notice both continuity and change. Even as we have built on areas of strength, we have also stretched into territories that Sterling and Francine never touched on. These processes of extension and expansion then make it possible to recontextualize works that have been in the collection for years, if not decades. And I'll have some examples shortly of how yesterday's outlier can become tomorrow's linchpin. To see where I am here. And slides, great. Okay. It must also be observed, and this is interesting, that what is judged most beautiful, most significant, or most valuable may change over time. And so as the curator stewarding this collection, I find there's a good dose of humility mixed with the surprise I sometimes feel when I see old annual reports and what was singled out for highlighting. For these reasons, we always have to be thinking along multiple timescales as we collect. Ideally, a given work can relate to past acquisitions, fit into present goals, and also be meaningful far into the future. Now, there would be many different ways to tell the story, 50 years of collecting. I could have arranged the galleries, in fact, someone suggested this, in the order by which works were acquired, sort of on a march through the decades, the 1970s acquisitions, and then the 1980s, etc. And although that's not the approach I ultimately decided to take, just for fun, let's start at the beginning and see at a 1973 acquisition from each show. Let's see if I can advance here. So I'm showing you on the left a sheet of studies by Sir Edward John Poynter on view in the Thaw Gallery, and a pastel portrait by Mary Cassatt over in the Clark Center, and both acquired in 1973. Now, Poynter is an artist you may know, even if you don't know it, from the opulent grand piano gracing our Gallery 3. Poynter painted the fallboard of this piano. But of course, piano acquisition, spectacular as it is, was still 24 years away, and certainly not imagined in 1973, although I do find it interesting to think about the way that Poynter studied figures in preparation for paintings and probably had a similar process for developing that composition on the fallboard. The Cassatt, on the other hand, continued a beautiful series of pastels by that artist already at the Clark, starting with The Child with Red Hat from the founding gift in 1955 and continuing with Woman with Baby, a gift of the executors of Governor Lehman's estate in 1968. Now, I won't do this kind of analysis for each work in this show, but it is a reminder that each one's place in the collection will shift over the years as other works are added. When you enter the exhibition in the Clark Center, this is the first work you'll see, Albert Altdorfer's Baggage Train. This is a large multi-sheet print that can only rarely be on view because of its imposing size, and indeed it has not been on exhibition display at the Clark since 2000, so do take this opportunity for a close look. Executed in woodcut more than 500 years ago, This epic frieze celebrates the unsung heroes of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian's many military campaigns, those who keep the soldiers supplied. This print was a gift from Julius Held, longtime professor of art history at Barnard College, who moved to Bennington after his retirement in 1971 and taught for a decade thereafter as Clark Professor of Art in the early years of the graduate program. And what this print allows is a sort of deep looking. There's almost a Where's Waldo effect and mystery that has surfaced already in the first couple of days, like what is that animal there in the foreground? I think we may do a crowdsourced survey through social media because there are differing opinions. Now, that kind of close looking is also rewarded, of course, in the prints of Albrecht Dürer. Whether depicting religious or secular subjects, Dürer imbued his prints with a pious devotion to detail that was highly influential for later printmakers. Know the poise and balance of the two figures in the flanking prints, and how these contrast with the almost out-of-control dynamism of the middle print, the Sudarium, or Veronica veil, spread out by an angel. The Sudarium was the cloth claimed to have been imprinted with the image of Christ when he wiped the sweat from his face on the road to Calvary. This etching's supernatural character has been suggested to equate the mystery of the Sudarium with the magic of printmaking itself, because with a little imagination, one can almost see the object held aloft by the angel as a printed sheet pulled from the press, bearing an image on its surface produced without the help of human hands. Now, I could say a lot more here about the role of printed images at the time of the Reformation, but I told you I wasn't going to be overly historical in this lecture, and I hope to keep to that. Instead, the figure of St. George at left, mounted on a horse and having just vanquished the dragon sprawled on the ground, leads me to a digression, if you'll humor me here, about the remarkable number of horses to be found in this exhibition. Now, in an extraordinary transhistorical leap, Dürer's St. George seems to morph into the photographically precise mounted jockey captured in motion by Jules Etienne Marey 380 years later, a pioneer of chronophotography. And there's more. I certainly didn't set out to make an exhibition about horses, but we find Tiepolo's galloping centaur bearing a bow and arrow, Max Jacob's pink jockey on a spotted horse, and even 4 horsemen of the apocalypse from a German artist of the early 20th century imitating Dürer. Hermann Wöller's supremely mystical visionary drawing takes us right back to origins, as it closely references Dürer's scene from his famed Apocalypse, a woodcut series from 1497 to 98. Yet all these muscular equine bodies and elegant profile make me think of a different kind of origin, that of Sterling Clark and his love of horses. The many sporting prints that he acquired in celebration of this passion, and which he gave at the Institute's founding in 1955, may seem of perhaps limited pedagogical or exhibitionary interest today, but as I have learned, don't be too quick to dismiss. You never know what will surge back to relevance. This print of the famous 19th century racehorse Lexington, the fastest ever thoroughbred, did exactly that when Geraldine Brooks's horse came out in 2022. We even accepted a request on the part of a local book group to hold their discussion of the novel in the Manton Study Center in the presence of this and many related prints. Well, now enough of horses. Now to another passion of Sterling and Francine Clark that has persisted into the collecting present. I'm speaking of early Italian drawings. Building on their recognized leadership in this area, the Clark has extended its founder's legacy with continuing high-quality acquisitions. These are 2 Italian drawings from the 30 acquired from the estate of Alice Steiner, another top-level collector, in 2003. Let's pause to appreciate the contrasts between these 2 exceptional ink drawings. Perino del Vaga's St. Peter on the right, whose majestic seated equipoise evokes the bulwark or rock to which his name refers, as against the nervous agitation of Jacopo Palma the Younger, St. Onofrius, the ascetic hermit saint who spent his life in the wilderness with only the meagerest of food and clothing. This drawing by Taddeo Zuccaro came as a gift from the Joseph F. McCrindle collection in 2009. In it, we can appreciate the elegant linearity and dynamic balance between the standing figure with an oar and the sleeping Christ at right, who will soon be wakened by his disciples and calm the approaching storm on the Sea of Galilee. We continue up to the present day building this area of early Italian drawings. Examples here are Ubaldo Gandolfi's seated male nude in red chalk, carnally warm and vital, roughly contemporary with Giuseppe Cades's two caryatid figures just acquired last year. There's a more complex mixture of media there that yields strikingly sculptural forms. The towering figures begin to be subsumed into a monumental, almost neoclassical architecture. And indeed, we know from the provenance that the drawing's first owner was an architect. But let's not forget these adorable putti at the center. In the exhibition, they get juxtaposed, somewhat playfully, with the ones in Adolf Menzel's sketch from the Nymphenburg Palace Park outside Munich. And you can see how carefully he captured the sculpted originals, although the conch shell is apparently now missing from the hand of the sculpture. The ravages of time since the mid-1850s. Now, in addition to the figure drawings I've been describing, we also have in the exhibition a generous section of drawings devoted exclusively to landscape, starting with this one by Claude Lorrain, an artist who's widely recognized as a fountainhead of the European and American landscape tradition. So we've teleported now away from Munich and over to Rome, where we're looking at a ruin on the Palatine Hill. You'll see an extremely refined manipulation of ink here. Using both the nib of a pen and then a brush with different dilutions of wash, Claude evokes all the reality of a ruined structure and its shadowy recesses, overgrown by hanging fronds and tufts of vegetation. You'll note that a couple of figures have also come and stopped to gaze. It's just one of 16 drawings by Claude that the Clark acquired in 2007, which made us, at a stroke, one of the most important repositories of his drawings outside Europe. Now, 16 Claude drawings would already count as an extraordinary collecting year, but 2007 was even more of an annus mirabilis at the Clark. And that is because works on paper, well, I looked at that year's annual report, and works on paper acquisitions occupied 23 pages, mostly due, of course, to the magnificent Manton gift of several hundred British paintings, drawings, prints, and watercolors. So here is where I will switch over to the British show, 50 years and forward, British prints and drawings acquisitions. So just take a walk with me, figuratively speaking, over there to the Thaw Gallery, and we will return to the Clark Center for part 2 of works on paper acquisitions in just a moment. So, of course, the vast majority of the British art at the Clark does come from the collection amassed by Sir Edwin and Lady Manton, pictured here. The fact that British art had not been a major collecting focus of Sterling and Francine Clark actually played to the museum's advantage when the Manton family was deciding on a home for their collection. Important centers for British art, Yale and the Huntington in this country, for example, were passed over in favor of the Clark, where such an infusion would make, and certainly has made, a decisive difference. A scholarly catalog documenting the entire gift was edited by the first Manton Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs, J.A. Clark, and published in 2012. Now, watercolor, to be more precise, exquisite examples from the golden age of British watercolor, constitute a glory of the Manton collection. It's such a privilege to bring these out and show them in proper gallery lighting. In these two scenes, fresh as a breath of sea air, we can see both topographic Turner in Falmouth Harbor, where, truth be told, he falsified the geography, and Proto-Impressionist Turner and the dreamy golden view of Ivrea near Turin in Italy. I'm going to go through quickly with some more mouth-watering pairs. Two castles, Thomas Girton's controlled, genteel, and accessible Windsor Castle view, and Hugh William Williams's lofty, blue-tinged Castle Campbell, perched on an outcrop in the Scottish Highlands. Here are two Girton watercolors from the round-numbered year of 1800. See how different they are. A descriptive and fully worked view of Lidford Castle, showing dramatic atmospherics and wonderful contrasts of light and shade over the green landscape, and a scrupulous, selective architectural view detailing the tracery of the Gothic apse. Here, two works by Samuel Palmer, a lush, large-scale watercolor glowing with the embers of a pastoral sunset, and a diminutive etching called The Morning of Life. Despite the contrast in scale and media and time of day, Palmer's aesthetic is unmistakable across the two works. Now, as I said, landscape is a particular strength of the Manton art gift, but with top-tier artists like Turner, Constable, Gainsborough, and many others. But there are also figural works, like Thomas Rowlandson's comedic yet hair-raising Peregrine rescuing Amelia from the inn fire. This sheet is packed with incident and humor and somehow manages to bridge the terror of escaping a wooden building during a fire with scenes of high comedy and ribald humor. Now, in the past several years, we're proud to have made gains in an area of the British collection still sorely lacking, and that is images of and by women. On this slide, I show you three. William Blake Richmond's idealized head of a woman, rendered with pre-Raphaelite wanness and delicacy, forms a sharp opposition to the modern-feeling, flesh-and-blood individual we see at center, drawn in charcoal by a young Evelyn de Morgan. De Morgan was one of the first women students at the Slade School of Art. They had just begun to admit women when she started there around 1875. And likely, this portrait in charcoal is a depiction of one of her classmates or a friend. Next to it, you see the spectacular black and gold head of Medea by De Morgan, now a mature artist, who became known for her full-length paintings of powerful women protagonists from history and myth. And what you're seeing here is this psychological complexity of Medea. In the full painting, she's carrying the vial of poison, which she will use to murder her faithless husband, Jason, and eventually their two children. But here you see this sort of horrible dilemma going on. All is conveyed even without that vial of poison visible. The showstopper in the final gallery is Anna Alma-Tadema's Garden Studio, a work we acquired at auction in 2020, an exquisite interior by the daughter of Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema, who was a first-rate artist in her own right. Her watercolors are extremely rare. We were thrilled to be able to acquire this one. And on the following slide, I want to show you how it uniquely nestles in the Clark's collection. So on the left, you'll see an etching by James Tissot, and it's no coincidence that this view of what he calls his garden in St. John's Wood seems to be a continuation of Anna Alma-Tadema's watercolor. And the reason is that Tissot was the prior owner of the property and sold it to the Alma-Tademas. And as the work on the main house in St. John's Wood was going on, Sir Lawrence used the garden studio for his primary workplace. And that's what Anna has captured there in the middle, with all this sort of beautiful and exquisite variety of surface and texture and many references to the art interests of the family. But also, I'm showing you a work by Sir Lawrence himself, a painting in our collection that, again, without taking away at all from Anna's achievement, suggests this interest in decor and surface and opulence that she grew up with and no doubt impacted her own aesthetic. And then I'd like to conclude this brief tour of the British show with our very newest acquisition. This is George Romney's Satan Surveying the Fallen Angels. It's a writhing, roiling composition from the very opening lines of John Milton's Paradise Lost. And one thing I love about this drawing is it expresses this bifurcated art practice of Romney. During the day, he was the most sought after and fashionable portraitist in London. He was dealing with a nonstop slate of clients and patrons whom, of course, he had to flatter and make look good. And in the evenings, the respite he sought from that grind was to let himself just go free with imaginative and historical drawings like this one. They weren't destined for any painting commission. They were simply his outlet for his creativity. And it's quite gorgeous. I encourage you to go and see it in the flesh after the lecture. So with that, we will hop back to the Clark Center and continue our tour of the non-British works on paper with another very new acquisition just this year. This is, excuse me, this is Hilaire Ledru's Painful Farewell. The story here is of a man, Joseph Le Cirque, seated at center, who is experiencing his final night in prison. He has been wrongfully convicted of a crime he did not commit, a gruesome murder robbery, and he will be sent to the guillotine the following day because of his unfortunate physical resemblance to the perpetrator. So you see him here saying his last farewells to his children who cling to him, his wife who looks on, and then, of course, the somewhat Minotaur-looking jailer there on the left side. And this is a very large, dramatic drawing, and it will also be the centerpiece of a public program in February focusing on contemporary issues of prison reform and wrongful conviction. So I encourage you to look out for that. This work also, This work also anchors a section called The Human Figure, Drama and Feeling, emphasizing melodramatic, emotional scenes, often of reunion or farewell with one's nearest and dearest. You'll see lots of rhyming gestures and facial expressions in this section, and so I'll leave you to discover the other works for yourself. The next section highlights prints by Goya and Manet. The influence of Goya's Capriccios on Manet is quite obvious here. It's seen not only in Manet's lifting of a figure from Goya's repertoire. We know Manet was a great admirer of Spanish art, and particularly Goya, but also this beautiful expressivity of the tonal medium of aquatint, which yields these velvety blacks and mottled grays, inspired Manet to try his hand at the same technique. And while we're talking about print and printmaking technique, I'd like to pause a moment on this monumental print. It's a woodcut by Christopher Jaeger after Rubens, Peter Paul Rubens, and you can see the importance and significance of their collaboration is highlighted in the signatures there at upper right. Both names are given, but the largest type is reserved for the claiming of a papal privilege as an early form of copyright to protect this magnificent image. And I've also given a detail of this remarkable detail of the flowing water and the water flowing from this fountain, which is just so completely at odds with the recalcitrance of the woodcut medium. It's hard, it's resistant, and yet it's all completely plausible somehow in Jaeger's handling. We can also put this woodcut in dialogue with prints by Paul Gauguin and Kyoshi Saito from a much later period, of course. But I'd like to call attention to this contrast because in Gauguin's woodcut, which is often translated Women at the River, made in Tahiti, you can see evidence of the rough-hewn wood, its natural grain, the variability of the inking where the block has been gouged out. To Gauguin, these were virtues, whereas to Jaeger, they would have been seen as defects or features to be minimized. The late 19th century revival of woodcut printing in Europe owed very much to the example of Japanese prints. Gauguin is even known to have brought some Japanese color woodblock prints with him on his first trip to Tahiti when he made the Noa Noa suite, and these certainly influenced his own engagement with the medium, even when he didn't print in color, which we today consider perhaps the primary distinction of Japanese prints from the period. Now, the strong influence of Japan on Europe, or European printmakers in the 19th century, then reversed direction in the 20th, when artists like Kyoshi Saito also embraced the roughness of the woodblock and the visibility of the wood grain. This print at right is actually from the 1960s, in which the artist very firmly claims his authorship, not only through the design of the print, but also the carving and its printing. Now, you had a chance to delect this slide at the start of the lecture. Kandinsky's color woodcut is coming from a different set of influences, but I would like you to notice that accession date of 1983. At that time, in the Clark's collection, this woodcut would have been a complete outlier. The collection was still very much stopping at 1900 and before any move toward abstraction or the modern period. But this is a direction we are beginning to go more and more, late 19th and into the 20th century. So please watch this space for more developments, and I'm very happy to share one of those with you already. This is an Edouard Vuillard pastel, a promised gift to the Clark from Betty and Jean-Marie Eveillard, who I'm pleased to say are in our audience today, so I'm able to thank you again in person. We are thrilled to announce this promised gift. It is a pastel called The Avenue, which you can see over in the Clark Center, and it directly relates to a Vuillard color lithograph in the collection, one of the suite of 12 that Vuillard made, called Landscapes and Interiors. So this is a quite magnificent addition to the existing holdings in that area, and will resonate into the future. Now I'd like to show you an installation shot of the final section of the exhibition, focused on photography. It's also by far the largest section in the exhibition, with 30 works, or more than a third of the checklist. When it comes to photography, we are celebrating only 25 years of acquisitions, not 50, because the campaign to acquire them only began in 1998. I mentioned earlier, Sterling and Francine had a relative indifference to the medium of photography, at least when it came to their art collecting. And so the campaign that began in the late 1990s was very conscious, intentional, and public, and thus received due attention in the press. And as Michael Conforti is in our audience, I feel a little squeamish about even speaking about it. He would be much better prepared to talk about the beginning of this direction in the collection. But what I know is that one of the first acquisitions was Gustave Le Gray's stunning Brig on the Water, an 1856 seascape that created a huge sensation when it was first shown in London and Paris. It has been called the most famous photographic image of the 19th century for Europeans at that time. And so I'm going to quote our then director, Michael Conforti, who said, this is from a press release that I found in the archives, our trustees recently resolved that it is critical for this institution, with its core teaching mission, to extend its holdings into a field that is central to the history of 19th century art. In forming the collection, the Clark found itself among the major players in the 1998 art market and demonstrated what an institution with resources and determination can accomplish in a short period of time, end quote. And then in board meeting minutes, Michael also recounted being the underbidder to Leon Black for a Delacroix photograph that sold at auction for $8 million in 1998, which is something of an honor, I would say. This campaign made waves even across the Atlantic, with a young Louvre curator by the name of Olivier Millet and others taking note. The photography collection is now the equal of the drawings collection in numbers, with about 1,000 examples in each. Now, in this photograph, Legray managed to achieve stunning details of sea and sky, which were technically very challenging to do at the time because of incompatible exposure times. This image was taken as a moonlit scene when it was first exhibited, when actually Legray photographed it in full daylight. Equally iconic on the American side is this photograph of Yosemite by Carlton Watkins, acquired in the same year, 1998. And since then, we have amassed more mammoth prints from this series, from Watkins working in California, and they form quite an impressive series, some of which you can see, again, in the Clark Center galleries. But you may have noticed in that installation view that at the center of the gallery is this group of ambrotypes, tintypes, and cabinet cards. These are forms of photography that in the post-Civil War years and during and after the Civil War represented new avenues of self-representation for Black Americans. And I must give recognition to Frank and Catherine Martucci, who couldn't be with us today, but who have been so instrumental and encouraging in encouraging this direction. It reflects a desire and strong efforts to diversify the collection in more ways than we have been able to in the past. By putting these at center, we want to valorize these works with their material traces of wear and use, pinholes to pin them to the wall, or perhaps dog-eared edges from handling. These were keepsake objects, often anonymous, that is by anonymous photographers, although some are known, and most of the individuals, their names are not known except perhaps their first names, and by the beautiful mounts that have been designed for these, which are made in clear plexi. You can go around the back and look at inscriptions that might say, "This is a photo of my son at 17," or "Please return," and there are traces of these familial attachments that make them all the more poignant. We consider it high time to put these works in dialogue with and on par with photographs with greater name recognition. The challenge here is to bring to public consciousness images that have rested in obscurity for historical reasons, but are equally deserving of iconic status. And speaking of name recognition photographers, so Alfred Stieglitz, here with the Black Forest Girl, I have paired it with Doris Ullman's photo of a fisherman in South Carolina, showing that photographic examples can somehow straddle the genres of portraiture and ethnography. In the case of Doris Ullman, who was born in New York and brought up in the city, but then in the 1920s undertook a tour to the Appalachian southern states and particularly spent time among the Gullah peoples of South Carolina and Georgia. And there she came to know these communities descended from African slaves, And my contention is that here her photographs really transcend the idea of type to capture individual presence, character, and lived experience, as in the case of the fisherman. You see it right. Berenice Abbott, a photographer very well represented in the collection with hundreds of prints, both portraits and landscapes, also used photography to elevate those who risked otherwise being marginalized. Whether it's the path-breaking lesbian writer Juna Barnes at left or the jazzman Charles Buddy Gilmore, Abbott left indelible impressions of these individuals. And then I'm going to conclude actually with this photograph by a photographer, James Van Der Zee, who was born in Lenox, Massachusetts, went on and made his career in New York as the leading photographer of the Harlem Renaissance. And this is, again, a credit to the Martucci's generosity. It's a print that is called, it's called Wedding Day Harlem. And you will notice that Van Der Zee has used his sort of signature technique of double exposure to include next to the wedding couple an image of a child holding a baby, and so doubly referring to the hope of children, of progeny and prosperity and continuing happiness for this couple. I like to think of it as a look toward the future, and that's why I want to conclude with it. We called the exhibition 50 Years and Forward. So, and forward, well, what's next? What is coming in the future? What new stories can be told? That is what we are looking forward to exploring over these next years, and we are looking forward to sharing these stories with you. And so I thank you for your attention. I would be happy to answer any questions. Thanks. Thank you. There is a microphone on the side here, so we're ready.
Thank you, very enjoyable. Looking forward to seeing the exhibition. Having learned today through your presentation that there are extensive holdings of both Claude's sketches and the 19th century photographs, I wonder if one of your future stories may be transitioning from Claude, especially his framing, to, and that Watkins photograph of Bridal Veil Falls was a clear example, transitioning through some of the period in the middle with the oils that are either on display or elsewhere in the Clark's collection.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate that. You're very much in the spirit of my of my enterprise here, which is to draw connections even when we're talking about crossovers of media or timeline or era and so on, nationality even. So for one thing is that what I skipped over in my talk is a long suite of drawings that do help to bridge this gap between Claude and the 19th century. So I'll be interested to see what you think of that sort of sequence, which covers, I don't know, 250 years of landscape drawing from different nationalities. And then as far as connections with the paintings, I mean, it's a spot-on comment, and there the challenge is just the different needs and light tolerances of different media. So it's why you often don't see, or where it's somewhat more complicated to exhibit paintings next to photographs or drawings. They usually can't, again, since they need different display requirements, they're a little bit difficult to show one next to the other. But I know that there are shows that have done this and done it successfully, and it's also a case that has been made in scholarship, right, about the direct influence of one on the other, because it's not as though it's not as though all photographers were only photographers, and painters and draftsmen tried their hand at the medium as well. And in fact, if you were around for our exhibition of cliché vert prints, this would have been 2 or 3 years ago, that's an example of major artists, Corot, Delacroix, and others, Millet, who in fact worked in the medium of cliché vert, halfway between photo and print. So it's a very welcome comment. I'll file that away. Thank you. Well, yeah, and I mean the Innes paintings are one way of beginning to bridge that, I think, here.
That was wonderful, and thank you so much. I learned so much. I wanted to know what you and Olivier and your colleagues are thinking about as you grow. What do you, prints, drawings, prints versus drawings, periods, identity, gender issues, photography. How do you imagine it? Not necessarily in the next year, but what would you like to see happen in 5+ years?
It's a big question. Thank you for that. So, I mean, one clear priority, and we are hardly alone among museums for recognizing that it is past time to rectify some of these disproportions. I mean, speaking demographically of women artists of color, many who have been underrepresented for so long. That's a slow process. It does take time. I mean, the identity of our collection is by no means fixed, but it has creates certain challenges to making rapid changes in that area, but we're quite committed to it. So we're looking for opportunities, and in addition to the examples I showed, all the energy around the Laitière exhibition project coming up next summer has generated many new acquisitions that are evocative of the Franco-Caribbean artist networks in the early 19th century. So I think that's a good example of where, even though we are not in the business of collecting contemporary art or art by living artists, we are able to respond to some of these hot button issues of identity and racial identity and so on through looking at historical material and adding historical material. So that's sort of one answer. We can make some of these changes still within our original brief. But that said, we are also committed to extending, again, the sort of traditional boundary of circa 1900 as an endpoint for the collection. I mean, that was the collection of the founders, and it made sense at the time, but of course, that was 1955, and so we've come much further. The artists who at the time still seemed rather modern and rather fresh now have been overtaken by others. And so it is time, and I mean, this is something that Olivier can speak about more eloquently than I, but it is really, it's appropriate, and it is in keeping with the institutional identity to extend forward into the 20th century. Even if, again, don't look for us to start acquiring, ultra contemporary things in the next 5 years. So those are, I think, the two major answers I would give. But it's also just a matter of what opportunities come along, and as you know as well as anyone, not all acquisitions that turn out to be major and significant are necessarily planned or deliberated far in advance. Sometimes an opportunity comes up, it's unexpected, and then there is an opportunity to really build something and to do it quickly. So we're always looking for those opportunities. Yeah.
Well, if there are no more questions, please join me in thanking Anne again for such a lovely talk.
Thank you. Thank you.